Hacks likes this very much.
Welcome to
Coffee with Toffees.
Five, four, three, two, one.
Let's do this.
And welcome back to Coffee with Toffees, guys. My name is Toffees, as always, bringing you the best you need to know in esports. You can find me at Toffees_Dota 2, and today's show is brought to you by Namecheap.com. They're a domain registrar that cares about internet freedom and esports, so go check them out and register your domain there at Namecheap.com. Now, I am joined here by a guest today who probably needs no introduction, but we're going to do it anyway. His name is David, quote-unquote, LD Gorman. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, man. Congrats on the sponsorship. You're reeling them in now. You got the Patreon going, the Namecheap sponsorship. You're living large.
You have to do what you have to do. By the way, we're also selling mugs. When Toby was here last week, we talked about how expensive it can be to sort of get started with content creation. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that later on, but I'm sure you know better than anybody just how hard it is to sort of make that transition from doing it for fun to doing it to pay the bills at the same time.
Yeah.
Before we get into that, and we'll probably talk about selling out since that's something that we hear all the time when we talk about LD, I want to talk a little bit about your past. Now, I know that you got started in CS, not Ghosts, Counter-Strike 1.6, so the old school Counter-Strike. You were a big FPS guy, and then I heard that was it your brother and his friends tried to get you into Dota?
Yeah, so I started playing Counter-Strike, I think I was like 13. And basically, it's what I did all of the time outside of school. I was a pretty decent student. I managed to get most of my homework done in school. So like I'd go home, and my mom worked full time. She ran a doll store at the time. So I'd go home and I would just play Counter-Strike until she got home. And of course, my mom wanted me to do more than just play those damn video games. So she was always pushing me to do more with sports, more with after-school clubs. I would do enough just to make her happy, but we had this funny system where she would give us like a time limit each day, 2 hours, and our kitchen stove had a built-in timer. But to increase the time, all you have to do is just turn this dial. So she'd come home. I've already played for like 4 hours. So I'm like, yeah, mom, I'm 30 minutes into my first 2 hours. Like that's it for the day.
Nice.
3 hours later, there's still an hour and a half left on the timer. So,
Nice.
I was a CS 1 point. I actually started right when retail came out, so I was a retail noob at the time.
Okay.
And I played it on and off competitively for probably about 10 years.
So what was it about Dota? Basically, for somebody who comes from a competitive on-off FPSer to making a career out of Dota 2, what drew you into this game and moved you away from Counter-Strike?
Well, by the time Dota 2 came out, I was kind of past my Counter-Strike days. I started playing the game in high school, and then I played it pretty crazily up until I graduated. When I went to college, I decided that I wanted to take a step back from it, focus on meeting people, having a social life. I had friends in high school, but it was in spite of my best efforts to not have a social life, not because of them. So I wanted to make more of an effort. So freshman year, I didn't play at all. Over the next few years, I got more comfortable, was happy with my social situation. So then I started playing competitively again. That went for a couple of years. All this time I was playing Dota on the side, but it was always like my relaxation game. Counter-Strike was the game that I played like competitively. Back in school, I would have a notepad out and we'd be diagramming like how to split into the B bomb site on Dust 2. Just really, like all that sent 3 out double doors, 2 from the hall. You're gonna flash here, we're gonna smoke there, and we're 13, right? This is long before Counter-Strike's really that developed as a competitive game, and of course we weren't that great, but we had that level of investment. Dota was always my fun, very like casual. When I want to chill and take a break from Counter-Strike, I'll play Dota. And that pretty much persisted until after I graduated college, I would say.
Nice. And then after college, you got more aggressively into Dota and away from FPSing?
It happened kind of gradually. I think what happened was I graduated. I was very busy with work. At first, I was doing something called NYC Teaching Fellows, which is pretty similar to Teach for America, but with a focus on the New York school system in particular. So that was more than a full-time commitment. I was a philosophy major in college, so I did not take any teaching certifications. I was not trained for this. I think I can be a natural teacher if someone's happy to learn, but one of the not so secret dirty secrets about public school teaching in New York is it's not really it's obviously important to be a good instructor, but a lot of it is learning how to kind of manage the kids and make them listen, so you create an environment where they'll even pay attention to the information you're trying to impart on them. So I took a step back from playing at that point. I ended up quitting the program, decided it wasn't for me. I moved back home with my folks for a while. I was doing IT consulting, and then I kind of moved along into more of a general consulting practice. Left that company, was doing my own thing, and it was around that time where Dota was my go-to like free time game for I guess 2 or 3 years. I'd been playing it on and off for I think 6 at the time, and I would play 4 or 5 hours a day. It was basically what I did when I wasn't working, and I was working for myself, so my hours were flexible, and it was always just a hobby. And then I watched TI1. I stayed up. I think the hours were really weird. I was on the East Coast, 6-hour time difference, and yeah, at the time I was actually in a normal person schedule. Though it's kind of crazy thinking back on it, how infrequently I'm on one nowadays. But stayed up all night. I still distinctly remember the first game of TI1. There was all kinds of pause issues, and it was this really boring. I think it was a Spectre versus Weaver game. There was like maybe Spectre versus Anti-Mage. There were only a few carries in the game at the time, and it was not a good way to start the tournament. The rest of TI1 ended up great. After that, I felt like this was something that I enjoyed. I really enjoyed watching the games. They got me hyped, and I thought, it might be interesting to get into commentating. I had been watching Luminous's cast from his YouTube channel. Back then, there weren't that many live broadcasts. This was right at the dawn of Twitch TV, end of 2011, beginning of 2012. There was some stuff going on in StarCraft, but it was hardly in its heyday. So I tried to cast Dota 2, and the problem back then was that you couldn't actually get in game lobbies very easily, and there was no Dota TV. So you would have to basically know people and beg for replays, because the only way you could actually cast games was that players would have to send you the replay. So I started doing that at first. There was a hack where you could actually connect to the way that it worked originally. Like, how whenever there's a pub game right now, you could just go and watch it.
Right.
They had that same functionality for private lobbies. So there was a way where you could find the IP for the server and connect. But the problem was that there wasn't like the scalable architecture. It was just the one source TV server, the one relay. So for bigger games, people started figuring this exploit out. They'd share the IP, and then it would end up like completely destroying the actual game servers. So Valve fixed that exploit. I could no longer cast at all through Dota TV. Because there was no ticket system at the time. So I went back to Dota 1. I started doing some YouTube casts. I was still a total noob. I sent some replays to Lumi and asked for feedback. He gave me a little bit after a lot of harassment, and then I kept on working on my craft, as it were. This was just a hobby at the time, and slowly but surely, I guess I made my way into casting more full-time.
Okay. And so before we move into the move to casting full-time, I did want to ask you, like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, you're from Philadelphia. Do you miss it? As somebody who lives on the East Coast, and actually I feel like there's a lot of casters who are from the East Coast. What do you miss most about living out here, and why the choice to move to LA?
I miss Philadelphia sports, man. I grew up as a huge Phillies fan, Eagles fan, even the Flyers, although hockey's not my most favorite sport, and the friggin' 76ers. When I was in middle school and high school, that was like Allen Iverson's heyday. I still remember that one NBA Finals against the Lakers, where I felt like we might have a chance, and then not the case in the end. Sad to say, Kobe too good. I think Shaq was playing for them at the time, but I really miss Philadelphia sports. I would go to baseball games a lot with my friends. When we were in college, we'd come home for the summer, we'd go to Phillies games, and this was when they were starting to actually get good, right before the World Series run. So I think that's the thing I miss most, aside from the obvious family and friends. There are definitely some sports heads in LA, but it's a lot of people are transplants here. There's not really like that grit, like salt of the earth. We've lived and breathed and grown up with these teams for the most part. I'm sure there are hardcore Lakers fans, but they ain't the same.
So why choose LA? I mean, we've talked about the fact you guys went out there, you built a studio and a house. I mean, doesn't it stand to reason that you could have got a house 65 times as large for the same price in, say, the Midwest, or you could have stayed in Philly for the same price? What drove you to the West Coast?
Well, at the time we were very fluid, I guess you could say. We could have pretty much gone anywhere. So at first, the way that we approached it was, what country should we be in? Because at the time, Gods was in Australia, I was in the U.S., so technically we could go anywhere. The big issue at the time was we did not have a ton of resources, so it made sense to look at a country that one of us lived in. We did explore some other options. At the time, we were very focused on Asian Dota, so I think the main places that we considered were Singapore, slightly Malaysia. It's pretty cheap there, and those are like the two countries in Southeast Asia that have decent internet. There's also Korea, but Korea is, for the most part, very expensive if you're in Seoul, and just did not really have a Dota culture at the time. So we did look at other countries. None of them really seemed like a good fit, and Australia is obviously just a terrible choice. The internet sucks. It's really expensive to get there. You're gonna have to fly no matter what events you're going to. The time zone is pretty good for Asian Dota, which is, I think, the main thing it has over the US, or did at the time when we were very focused on Chinese and Southeast Asian tournaments. So we decided the US, and then from there it was a question of, well, where in the country should we go? So we kind of looked around at, where are a lot of the big companies. At the time, NASL was possibly getting into Dota. They had been kind of reaching us out, giving us feelers if we would maybe want to work with them. This was when they were still doing pretty well with StarCraft. And I think what really brought us here in the end was just the people. So Purge had just moved out here from Wisconsin. He moved to LA. He was living with one of Blitz's friends in a house, and they had some room. So they had a house that we could live in, which had good internet. It was pretty affordable, despite, I know a lot of the average renters like, LA is so expensive, but we don't live like in downtown LA. We're not in Malibu, we're not in Santa Monica. We live in the suburbs outside of it, and now a bit farther out. But so that was convenient. But I think what really brought us here was that Blitz was here, Purge was here, and Lumia was here. And at the time, the whole idea behind wanting to build a studio was, we don't want to just cast from our bedrooms anymore. We want to actually be able to, put everyone on camera together, have more of a show feel. I think the Good Studio had started doing some stuff in Dota. No, this was before they were doing much in Dota 2, but we'd see what they were doing in StarCraft. We thought like that's kind of an interesting model. It's fairly accessible compared to, trying to like go straight into commercial space, and we didn't have the resources for that. So in the end, it was mostly convenient because we weren't in a position, nor did I think we would have been able to get any of these people to relocate. And otherwise, it would have just been me and David living in, Kansas City, just the two of us, which could be fine. But there's a lot more connections, not just to Dota people, but there's a lot of companies, tech companies, esports companies. Generally, it's a pretty young market. You look at like some of the big developers, a lot of them are based in and around the LA area. Valve's obviously not, but you have Riot, you have Blizzard, who are both in the area. So it's maybe not thought of as much of a tech hotbed as like San Francisco, but it's a lot cheaper than San Francisco, and it's also just kind of convenient. And I'm not gonna lie, the weather's nice.
Yeah, no.
When you're casting inside most of the time, it's nice to be able to go outside and have sandals on and some sun hit your face. I don't get very much, so I gotta take what I can get.
Never has that been truer than it is right now. Guys, if you hear crazy sounds in the background, it's because there are front loaders outside of my house moving the 7 feet of snow piled up on the side of the street. So I apologize for that. So I figured now's a good time to bring it up since we're talking about the weather. Now, let's take a second to go back to the Indiegogo that you guys used to launch BTS. I was looking through it, and your goal was $25,000. Based on what I know about the world that we live in, it seems like $25,000 is not enough to buy a house, equip a studio, handle the equipment. Was that really enough, or was there additional investment on the side?
We had some support from Twitch. We had saved up a decent amount for us at the time. I think we'd saved like $10,000 from 4 or 5 months of streaming on Twitch, which at the time was really good. People were not making much money from ad revenue back then. So we had a little bit in reserve, and honestly, we didn't know exactly how much we would need. We just had a vision and kind of a passion for wanting to give it a go, take a big risk. Let's just see if we can do it, man. We had both myself and Gods had job offers from Freaks for You to go and work with Toby on the Join Dota project, and we had strongly considered them for a while. Obviously, at the time, Toby was the caster, and we thought it could be a great opportunity to learn from him and hopefully to grow. But ultimately, For myself at least, I really like working for myself, and that was something that I kept on pushing with David when we were discussing whether or not we wanted to go plunge ahead with the project. So before we actually committed to it, we ran the Indiegogo. It was amazingly successful, and as far as what we expected at the time, looking back on it, it was both more money than what we technically needed at first and not enough in the end. Like the amount of money that we had was enough to cover the cost of gear, but
Right.
the real cost of the studio, as we quickly found out, is it's not just gear, it's all the other stuff. And I mean, I think the biggest thing is just making sure people get paid properly, which at the time nobody was really paying the casters. Join Dota wasn't paying their co-casters. They'd bring in like Cinder and her puppy, and they would just cast games. It was good exposure for them at the time as well. So it's not like they got nothing out of it. But as it turns out, the equipment wasn't even that was the tip of the iceberg as far as expenses go.
Okay, so that's good information. I think interesting. I was curious, how many of the songs that people bought did you have to sing, and how many songs did Gods have to sing? And did you post those on the internet anywhere?
Oh God, I think we have some of them on the YouTube channel. I will say in general with the Kickstarter, a lot of people who chose rewards never responded to any of our emails. Some of them who did respond said, I just want to support you guys. I just chose them." The way the Indiegogo site works, you don't have to choose a reward, but I think some people thought you had to pick one. So
Makes
they just
sense.
picked one, and then they're like, oh, I don't really care about that. So in total, I think we did 5 or 6.
Okay.
It wasn't nearly as many as what people had signed up for.
Okay, and then my other big question is, you had 22 people sign up for the we will commentate anything for you stretch goal. Was there anything weird or quirky that was sent to you, or was it pretty much all standard stuff?
It was pretty much all standard. I was really disappointed.
Really? That's a bummer.
I was like, I wanted someone to send me a video of them like brushing their teeth or just going to the bathroom or walking the dog, picking up their poop. I don't know, just something different. But it was mostly like, hey, can you cast this game with my friends? And yeah, it was fun. We got some really crazy games, and the people that we did them for really appreciated them. But it definitely wasn't as wacky and wild as what I was hoping for.
Nice. All right, so let's talk a little bit about some past interviews you've done, and I want to segue that into talking about the future, and then we'll go to some Reddit questions to wrap up towards the end. So in an interview that you did with G Sports once upon a time, this was prior to the 2002 TI, you said that there was a moment in a game called The Bash that was your favorite esports moment. It was in the qualifiers between Duskbit and Ice. Is that still one of your favorite moments, or is there something that has trumped that since then?
I think that was the first time I ever felt like I had properly done a hype cast, because when I started casting, I was really dry. I mean, there was no emotion at all in the cast because I didn't really know how to commentate. And so it was more like me watching the game and just talking about things as they occurred to me. I had been watching Luminous's cast, and I kind of modeled my commentary after his own initially. And back then, Lumi was very analytical. It was less like casting games live, and more he'd find an interesting replay, and he'd almost do a replay analysis. So my commentary was kind of trying to model after that, but I didn't really do a very good job of it. But that game with the Bash was the first time where I actually felt like something crazy happened, and I caught it in the act, and this guy was gonna live, but I think a Void got a bash on him right as I think it was an anti-mage was about to blink out, and the hero didn't have buybacks. The enemy team ends up winning, and I just fucking lost it, man. It would be the start of some trouble with my roommate. I was living with a guy who had a normal 9 to 5 back then, and it was like 5 in the morning, and I think the next day he was a little. We would have our little spats at times, and he did not appreciate how loud I was, to put it mildly. Which I don't blame him for at all. I was kind of a dick. I feel bad.
Well, you got to build the hype, so I can't hold that against you. Let me ask you this. Nicer Dicer asked you back then, who was your favorite caster, to which you gave probably one of the best dodges I've read in an interview to date. You literally spent 3 paragraphs, or I would say 2 paragraphs, dodging the who is your favorite commentator question. So I want to put you on the spot and ask you right now. You can't watch yourself. Well, I guess you could say yourself if you want to be egotistical. Who do you love watching or listening to as a commentator?
Can I say it varies and then list a few people, or do I just have to pick one?
No, absolutely. You can list a few if you need.
I mean, if I had to pick one for just pure entertainment, I really enjoy Cyclops' casting. I know he's a very love him or hate him kind of guy. I find him fucking hilarious. I think he's really witty. He gets a lot of hate for the accent, but Cyclops is definitely, if I just want to sit back and laugh about Dota, he's my man. Outside of that, I think the most well-rounded caster for me is, I don't think it's any surprise to say Cinder in terms of overall best balance of, he can do play-by-play, he can do analysis quite well, which is kind of his default calling, and
Oh, looks like we've got some internet connection problems with
pure humor, I'd say Cyclops.
Hold
What's
on,
that?
Hold on 1 second. I think you just cut out. It looks like you're back, so maybe we should be okay.
Okay, we use a proxy here, so it's possible that I might have to do some finagling if it acts up. But
It sounds like we're back. I think last thing we got was Cyclops, because he's fun to sit back and just sort of listen to.
um,
And then Cinderin, you said, I believe, you started to say Cinderin was great, but I didn't get a whole lot after that.
so I would say Cinderin's the most well-rounded overall caster. If you had to pick just one caster to do everything, he can be really funny with Suns Fan, and just in general, not just with Suns Fan. His analysis is great, obviously. He has real passion for the game and is able to convey it just with his tone of voice, with his general enthusiasm, something that a lot of analysts really struggle with. I would say it's probably one of the weak points in general for a lot of the top analysts right now. And he's a hardworking guy as well. So I would say probably Cinderin overall, Cyclops for humor. For pure hype, I think Toby is the obvious choice. He's been doing it for ages. He's amazing at what he does. As far as a pure play-by-play caster for Dota, I don't think you could do better than him. So if I had to pick just one, I'd probably say Cinderin.
Awesome. So let me ask you, and we'll bridge off a little bit, go on a rabbit trail. You brought up Cyclops, and I think that he is a great pivot point to sort of talk about polarization within Dota as we sort of have become a more and more, I don't want to say respected sport, but as we've become more and more mainstream, maybe is a better way to say it. And Cyclops is a different kind of caster than, say, you're used to. Do you think that polarization is good? Is it bad? Do you think that we should have these sort of fun, lighthearted casts from time to time, or do you think it should all be professional ESPN level casting all day?
I mean, at this point, I don't even know what professionalism is anymore. I've had people tell me that I'm unprofessional, because I'm balding. I've had people tell me that I'm unprofessional because I laughed during a cast. I've had people tell me that I'm unprofessional because the game lagged too much, and that if we were being professional, we would have prevented it. So, in all seriousness, I don't want to go the all ESPN route. I think we really need a variety, and I think it's a vocal minority that wants incredibly button down ESPN style broadcast. I mean, great example is the Good Studio. You look at their fan base, their audience, they have a very passionate following, although it seems like they may not be doing much in Dota moving forward. There's a group of people that love that will continue to love that. I think for certain types of events, maybe that style isn't the best, but should we get rid of it entirely? No, I think that would be a big mistake. So I think we want a variety, and I think each event needs to develop a style that suits the scope and kind of the tone of the event they're going for. So, for MLG, yeah, you're not going to hire Cyclops, right? It's just not a good fit. For someone like that, you want someone who's more buttoned down, more professional, someone who can kind of do a more traditional live broadcast. But I think it just depends on the event, honestly. We've had a lot of people complain, as much as for the summit, I think it's a good example of how polarizing community feedback can be. There are a lot of people who hate the casting at the summit, even when it's pro players, even when it's their favorite pros. I've had so many people say, I don't like, these players. They're too nitpicky together. They're not hype enough about these exciting moments, which I think is fine because there's plenty of other events where you get that. But understandably, everybody has different tastes in casting. And I think I look at how I receive professional sports. Like, I don't really like most of the professional sports commentators I listen to, but I also really, end of the day, for myself personally, I just tune them out because I'm mostly there to watch the game. I know some people are really into the certain commentators, and maybe I'm putting myself out of a job and say this, but there's plenty of people who just don't care. They just want to watch the game. If you have a great commentator, on the other hand, it can really enhance your experience, but it's not that hard to mute them if you hate them that much. So it kind of baffles me when people get that upset because I watch Eagles games cast by Joe Buck. Right. I despise the guy, especially when he's casting Philadelphia teams. I think he's biased. I'm probably the biased one more than him, but
Hmm.
it's like I'm an Eagles fan, right? So I'm gonna get mad anytime he says if he sides with the refs or defends the refs and they make what I think is a bad call. It's just human nature as a fan to get upset.
Well, isn't there something to be said about the production value of, for instance, I think everyone in America loves to make fun of John Madden and his football coverage or the things that he says that are ridiculous observations. Like they need to go for a touchdown right now. It's obvious. Do you think that there's a production value to having the ability for the viewer on the couch to look at their buddy and say, he's an idiot, and sort of get involved with the cast during boring moments?
It's really the big difference between like video game commentary versus pro sports, right? Because yeah, some people watch the games at home by themselves, but it's a lot more common to consume quote unquote, regular sports with friends. Like most football games, baseball games, whatever, I'll go to the game. I'll sit down on the couch, watch with my friends. So I have people to chat with and just to talk about. So that's where I think with esports, it's a bit different because most people are not watching in a group. Yeah, you have pub stomps for special events, but generally most people are watching from home at their computer. So they have Twitch chat. I mean, unless you're using subs mode, Twitch chat is not really a great way to have a real conversation.
Right.
And so then some people go to forums, but I think what tends to happen is people care more about what the commentators are saying because the commentators are kind of their buddies. Like they're
Right.
for a lot of people, it's like your friend. If you really enjoy Tasteosis, for example, I think what they do the making being the audience's buddy better than pretty much anyone else. I think Sunsfan and Syndra do a pretty good job where you feel like you're just hanging out with some friends, talking about the game, maybe shooting the shit a bit when things aren't too crazy. And I think because of that just dynamic where you're generally watching on your own at home, esports commentators tend to be just under the gun more. It's also just a more internet driven business, so it's very easy to give feedback. If I don't like a commentator in pro football, what do? Am I going to write them a letter? Am I going to tweet at them? I mean, I'm not getting Joe Buck fired just because I don't like his commentary. But,
So
a little different for Dota.
as we talk about casters, let's move into a little bit of your style of casting. You did an interview with Gozu a while back when you were first starting out, and in it, this is how you described your prep system. And I'm going to read a quote here. If I'm preparing to cast a major Dota event, most of my day is spent studying teams' replays, going over recent trends in their picking and banning via Dota Academy stats, and generally trying to get a deeper understanding of how they are drafting and playing. Is it still like that? And if not, do you regret the changes?
It is like that sometimes. Now, the truth is, when we're in busy season, you just can't do that much preparation for every game. It's simply not possible. For example, when we get towards Summit Crunch time, we're basically spending all of our time that's not casting working on the event. Now, I know it is like that for some commentators, so I don't think this is universally true for esports. A good example would be I think most of the league commentators, I don't know them personally, but from what I understand, they have a lot more time and space and resources to prepare for broadcasts. I know a lot of them have had vocal training, camera presence classes, something I've never had. Um, I know you look at someone like Apollo for ESL, he's a full time commentator. As far as I know, he's not expected to do a ton behind the scenes. He's mostly just expected to do the best possible cast he can. We're a startup. So, I'm not only a commentator, I'm also helping us run the business. So, for the summit, it doesn't pay for itself. We put out a $100,000 prize pool. We paid for flights and accommodations in full, which is pretty damn expensive, especially if you have to book flights fairly last minute. On top of that, we fed the teams for every meal. We're providing all ground transportation. We're completely converting our house, which is not a small process. So, and we have a staff that needs to support us through all these efforts. You obviously need to have rules for the event that are conveyed to the teams and managers. You need to address issues as they come up throughout the event. You need to make sure your sponsors are happy so that they give you money so that you can pay the teams and cover those costs and not go bankrupt. So I guess basically what I'm saying is we're a startup, and when I started commentating, I was just a commentator doing it as a hobby. And part of that transition has been that there are times where I don't personally get to prepare as much as I would like for every broadcast. But for big events, for like a DIC, for Star Ladder, for any LAN event I've ever done, I put in just as much preparation as I ever did. But for your day-to-day online games, unfortunately, the truth is it's just not possible.
Okay. But it sounds like in a perfect world, that's something that you do enjoy doing as part of the casting gig.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels better as a caster. When you're
Mm.
prepared, you know how the teams are picking and drafting. I mean, I go back to some of the DAC casts where between all of us on the panel, I mean, we were calling out like 8, 9 of the picks every
Right.
draft consistently. Now, Winter made some really good unexpected predictions, but there's a lot of more just basic stuff that you just get from watching the teams and casting them a lot. So I don't think it's only about replay analysis or studying a ton of stats. Part of it's just casting a certain volume. Now, it gets tricky when you're crossing over regions, right?
Right.
So if I'm casting NA Dota week after week after week, it's you know all the players in and out. You know
Right.
what everyone's picking NEL. You know all the little niche tendencies, like that Jenkins likes to play Pudge and hook creeps and pull mid, like
Mhm.
all these little idiosyncrasies that you would never know if you didn't cast the region. So there's only so much that replay analysis and kind of that stat stuff can do for you. A lot of it comes down to just watching
Mhm.
and casting as much as possible. And I'm pretty confident that there's nobody else that consistently watches / casts more than our full time casters. So
Okay. And you,
outside of players.
you brought up the summit too as a tournament sort of prep and all the things that are going into it. Since you brought up tournaments, we'll jump ahead a little bit to what I was planning, and let's talk about the PPD YouTube video. Have you had a chance to watch that thing that was on the front page of Reddit talking about why DAC was a successful tournament?
Yeah, I took a look at it.
What did you? I was curious to get your opinions as an organizer and a caster and a personality to what PPD said.
Well, it's a I have a lot of thoughts on the whole thing. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is this EG team, from what I recall, had quite a few complaints and criticisms of the organizers during the event.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to see that then they win the tournament, and then all of a sudden the feedback's a lot more kind of balanced and even positive at times. Now, maybe that's just because in the heat of the moment, you get a little frustrated about something in particular, you just want to vent. I personally feel like in my experience with players and teams, the teams that win are generally happy.
Mhm.
So, great example is tournament format. Going back to the Summit 1, which after the Summit 2, we had quite a few players say we really like the format better at the Summit 1. But during the Summit 1, anytime a team would get eliminated, no matter what, they'd be upset. And more often than not, there was a complaint about the format. And it seems to be a consistent trend with me that when a team doesn't have a good event, they tend to be a lot more vocally negative towards the tournament and towards the format. Now, that's not to say the feedback isn't valid, but it is to say that when you're hurting, when you're frustrated, it's easy to lash out. And I think it's never as bad as players that are really, or that, or organizers who are really frustrated say, and it's never as when they're upset, and it's never as good as when they're really happy and positive about the event. Now, that said, I think DAC did a lot of things right from what he's talking
Mhm.
about. Having each team having a handler,
Yeah.
having dedicated translators, which seems like common sense, but none of the Chinese tournaments have been doing it. So I'm not taking away from DAC. It sounds like
Right.
they did an exceptional job in a lot of areas, but I mean, every event has problems. Players are pretty much always going to have something that frustrates them. I've never seen a player that lost early in a tournament that had no complaints about the event. And I mean, maybe every event's just that bad, but I find it hard to believe.
Do you think inviting, and this was brought up on Reddit as well by a couple people, do you think inviting more teams to tournaments is a must, or do you think that it's just going to be too much of a time commitment or too much of a difficulty for organizers to make work?
As far as direct invites go, you're saying?
Yeah, it sounds to me like when PPD was talking, he talked about how all the best teams were there, and either everybody was direct invited, or it sounds a little bit like some of the qualifiers had ringers thrown into it to guarantee that they came out into the actual tournament itself. Is that something that you think should be the standard, or do you think that more
Well,
qualifiers?
as far as the Rainers thing goes, that to me that's a separate and very bad issue. Like
Hmm.
the teams should not be allowed to use Rainers to help them secure berths at a land finals. If that player is a part of your team, now I'm not saying a team can't use a stand-in in certain circumstances, but it's not cool for PPD to go and stand in for Fire because he's buddies with them, and then they end up qualifying for major all stars, and then he doesn't even go to the land, but like their normal fifth does. That's not cool at all.
So
But
to clarify, when I said ringers, I should just so that nobody thinks that I'm saying that anybody was cheating or anything. I mean, for instance, the North American qualifiers with it was Cloud9, if I remember correctly, that was in this grouping that everybody said, well, maybe they shouldn't be. It was an easy way out, or arguably an easy
Well,
way out for them and in.
I mean, that's very cut and dry. They should not have been in the North American qualifier. They should have either been in the European qualifier or they should have been directly invited. I believe the organizers did not want to directly invite them,
Mhm.
but also wanted to all but guarantee they would get there, which by putting them in North America, they probably thought they were all but
Mhm.
guaranteeing it. As it turned out, Cloud9 barely made it. There was
Right.
3-2. It was a very close final. So I don't like that sort of thing. At the same time, I don't blame the team for it. I call out the organizer for that. We've been in that position before. With the Summit 1, we invited Cloud9 to our America qualifier, but over time, I think we've evolved our understanding, and just I feel strongly it's very unhealthy for the American scene to have teams that are majority Europe or majority any other region. It wouldn't be right if newbie suddenly played in SEA qualifiers.
Right.
They probably wouldn't do it, but if there's a situation where it made sense, it's not something that should happen. As far as PPD's thoughts about invites, I don't disagree with him, but I think it's a little more complicated than what he makes it out to be. So, for example, for the Summit 3, we have 2 America qualifier slots right now. So, if we directly invited EG, then there's 1 slot. That was the plan for the tournament. And so I dislike when some of the top players make it sound like they create this false dilemma of, well, if you don't invite us, then you're taking away slots from these tier 2 players or these up and coming teams, or everyone below this top set, because that's not the case at all. EG at that point is guaranteed to take one of those slots, so you're automatically ensuring that they'll be there. Will they win the qualifier? Quite likely. At the same time, and I think it's fine for the players to lobby for these slots, but let's be honest, they're lobbying for themselves. They're not doing it to support the scene in all cases. In some cases, perhaps, but not in all.
Well, and you brought up earlier, you talked about Jenkins, and everybody knows him for his hook. He actually released a video about how to take a non-factor team to a semi-pro status. I don't know if you had a chance to watch that. If anybody hasn't, go check out the Leviathan YouTube. It's a really good video. But in it, he says that your goal as an unknown team is to make it into open qualifiers so that you can play that final qualifier match against a team like EG. You're going to lose, but if you put up a good showing, next time you're going to get invited to that tier 2 round. You're going to get invited to bigger and better things. So is there a possible argument to, it's great to have these tier 1 teams go through the qualifiers just so that a lot of tier 2, tier 3 teams can cut their teeth against the big dogs?
I think that's a really powerful argument, and it's one of the reasons why we're not, for smaller scale events, and for events that don't have, like for DAC, it's different, right? Because DAC has 16 slots. They should not be having qualifiers for 16 teams. That's obvious. You should be inviting quite a substantial portion of those. But a lot of smaller events, for example, D2L has had 4 slots at their past few LAN finals. We've had 6. Other events, normally I'd say the average event has somewhere between 4 to 8 teams. Now, at that point, if you have 8, maybe you can invite 2 teams. You invite 4 teams. At best, you have 1 qualifier for each region, or you just completely box out certain regions. And I think long term, America is kind of a special case, and I think EG it's a bit different for them than for other teams. They're the big dog at a small pond, and they're also an exceptionally talented team. So the thing is, if their primary goal was to help grow the North American scene, playing these qualifiers is much better than them being directly invited. Sure, they're almost certainly going to win, as he mentioned. I don't think they've ever lost an American qualifier, but they give the teams that chance, which to play against EG. If an event, let's say our event, has 2 America qualifier slots and we directly invite EG, then that means only 1 American team from the region even gets a chance to play them, because they'll only see them at the LAN finals. Other events, you might have 1 slot. And so if you just directly invite EG, like ESL is a great example, they don't have American qualifiers. So then you're asking these teams to play odd lucks or not even letting them play the European qualifiers. I think ESL decided to let teams play on lucks from America. But, that's obviously an uphill battle. It's not really great practice the same way that playing on your own region can be. So I think these top players are mostly looking out for themselves, and I think that's totally fine. And I'm not saying they're selfish, and it's what they should be doing. And if I were their manager, I'd be telling them to do the exact same thing. But this is not community service. They want to get directly invited to the events because it's guaranteed prize money. It means that it frees them up to then play qualifiers for other events or to just have more time off to relax. It's in their own interest. And I just think it should just be explained that way. I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but if the players really care about growing the scene, then at least participating in some of these online qualifiers is ultimately good for the scene.
So let me ask you this. He also brought up the idea that studios and organizers should focus less on advertising, whether it's running commercials or things between matches, and focus more on just ticket sales. In fact, he said that's why DAC was such a good tournament. Do you think that that's actually a feasible model, or is that maybe seeing the world with rose-colored glasses?
Well, tickets don't sell particularly well. The I don't think it's a big secret to say that it's hats. Hats are what sell right
Mm,
now. And I think it's a problem for Valve, and I'm pretty sure they're aware of it. Dota TV is a good product, but for bigger events, Valve generally wants Dota TV to be free. So they don't even want people to have to pay. DAC you didn't have to pay to watch in game. TI you didn't. They want people to be able to watch for free, and then those who choose to support the event by buying cosmetics and compendiums can go that extra step. But what sells a
mm,
compendium? I mean, come on, it's not the compendium. Do people really go into the compendium to read the stats, to check the standings there? If you want to check the standings, you go on Liquipedia or Gosu Gamers or Join Dota or the tournament website. People are buying compendiums because of the hats that come with them or because they want to support the tournament and the
mhm.
team. They're not buying them for the product.
Right.
And the product that people want that they'll spend money on is in-game items.
Mm,
I think Valve wishes that. I mean, I think there's other stuff that can be done. For example, why isn't there a way? I even remember Purge told me about this a while ago. He went to visit Valve, and they were working on a way for people to be able to like subscribe to their favorite players. So,
mhm.
or that at least they've been kicking around. So, if you want to like have access to all of Purge's replays, you can subscribe to him, and there could be other functionality related to that. And then right now, the only way to do that, people just go outside of Dota 2. They do it through
Right.
Twitch, right? But why isn't there more of a way for these players who have knowledge, who have a brand that they want to market, to be able
Mm,
to market it within the game? The only way they can do it right now is player sets, and
right.
basically that's hats. And then what happens is the workshop creators feel like they're being cheated
Mm,
because for the most part, because there's always this tension of, well, it's really our product that they're selling. And
mhm.
I don't think it's just happenstance that Valve is mostly letting through chests that are tied to tournaments, items that are tied to tickets tend to have an easier time getting in. I think it's Valve's kind of imperfect way of trying to make sure that people who are valuable, workshop creators, as well, or not workshop creators, people who add some value to the scene, such as tournament organizers and teams, they have some way to monetize their brands, but it's a very indirect and imperfect model, and you're just
Mm.
always going to have tension until Valve finds a way, if they can. I mean, I don't have an easy, great solution. If there was one, I think they would have already implemented it. But right now, I think it's just an imperfect band aid. But it's not the compendiums or the tickets that are selling. Most people are happy to watch on Twitch. If they can watch it for free in game, then they will. But when it's a paid product, it has to be that much better, and I just don't think there's enough of a difference. Now, there's exceptions with people with really bad internet, or care a lot about video quality or want to watch player perspective. There's definitely value in Dota TV. It's just look at the numbers for any tournament. Most of
Right.
these tournaments are tournament Dota cinemas. What's selling is hats, and it's
Yeah.
just a band-aid solution for a deep problem.
Well, let's be honest. I can't watch a tournament on Dota TV while I'm also playing Dota at the same time, but I can do that with Twitch. So I think, and honestly, I think a lot of people do that. I mean, that's a pretty common thing from what I understand. But moving away from this sort of tournament planning thing, I want to keep talking about tournaments, but let's go back a little ways. After the TI2 event, and I talk a lot about this because it was sort of your breakout into the scene period. You said that event was great, and this is actually what you said about the event. You said we were all there because we love this damn game to death, and it really showed. There were no egos, no bad blood, no grudges or hatred. It was just a bunch of people united by their insane passion for competitive Dota. You've been to LANs since then, and since then we could argue that Dota has exploded in terms of sponsorship, combat for positions within the content creation community. Is it still like that? Do you still get that warm, fuzzy feeling at LAN events?
Well, first of all, I have to say to the LD that made those comments 2 years ago, you were slightly looking at things with rose-colored glasses. I really loved it too. It was an awesome experience for
Mm,
me. I think it's silly to say there was no bad blood, there was
mm,
no tension, there was no anything. I mean, there were players that had fights, teams broke up. Some teams uh, fought during the event. It's commentators had their small beefs. I mean, nothing's perfect, right? There was the drama with Slesh and Cinder in at TI2 even. Um, that said, I think for me, it's a different kind of passion. Like TI2 was like, holy shit, I'm on a stage in front of thousands of people. I know millions or more are watching at home. I've never actually worked a live event. When I was a freshman in high school, I ran for class president. And so, at least back then, the way that it worked is everyone would have a chance to go and give their speech in front of the class. So I walked down in front of the auditorium. I'm not even on the stage, I'm just on the ground. and my hands were shaking so bad that like people started laughing at me in the front row, and then everyone started to notice. It was embarrassing as hell. I was not naturally comfortable speaking in front of a crowd. So that was TI2 for me. Was that pure adrenaline, and I think that's more my experience of TI2. But I think for every commentator, every player, there's nothing like that first event. I still go back to the Eternal Envy blog where he was saying how it used to be different when I played Navi. I'd have like this rush of adrenaline, and if I beat them, it like changed my world, and now it's just another online game. That's mostly because it was his first time playing these top teams, or one of his very first few times. Once you have enough experience with it, I wouldn't say you get jaded, but you kind of get used to it, right? Like no matter what, there are people who go out on skyscrapers every day and are cleaning the outside of those things. Have you ever thought about that? Like,
Oh yeah, no.
can you imagine the first time that you go out there? Even if you're not particularly afraid of fights. I mean, my God, you're pissing your pants, right? But I imagine at some point it's just another day at work for them, and so. I think it is in that sense. I still deeply love the game. There are people all the time who say, "Oh yeah, I know there's this general, what would you call it? This general zeitgeist that BTS is just raking in the dough, and I've got a Ferrari in the garage, and Gods has a couple Lamborghinis. We've got a private jet. We're pocketing all this money." I was making a lot more money in my old career, and I had a very good trajectory with that. I started commentating Dota as a hobby. I only got into it full time because I loved what I was doing. And that's not to say I'm starving, but I mean, we're all in this because we're passionate about it. I think there's very few people who started with Dota and have grown with Dota, if any, who don't love the game. Now, there are external companies that may come in and try to capitalize on that existing market.
Right.
And those, sure, maybe some of them are very profit and money driven, but I think on average, I don't think you can point me to someone who's been in the Dota scene for as long as I have, or even longer than me, and say that person has no passion. That person doesn't love the game. They're in it for the money. It's just not true.
So let's talk. So that's a good segue to talking about BTS when it was formed and sort of your intentions at that point based on passion. So when BTS was starting out, you were asked about the future of BTS when you guys were sort of getting the ball rolling. I'm actually going to read it because this statement I thought was very, very interesting and a vision that you had for the future of BTS. You said that the goal was elevating the standard for how tournaments are covered and presented. That's really the primary goal and focus right now of Beyond the Summit, which Gods and I have both been working day and night on over the past few months. We're tired of tuning into stream after stream and just seeing another cast, having no idea who the teams playing are or why we should care about them. To truly get viewers excited and invested in matches, there needs to be an engaged storyline, and it's primarily the job of the tournament organizer and production staff to convey the narrative to everyone. Do you feel like you've accomplished this goal?
Not for every event. I think there's a lot of events where we have, and there's a lot where we have not. And I think when I made that statement, that was shortly after we had done our coverage of the G1 League. So that was like the first Beyond the Summit event that I was a part of. There was 2 other events over the summer organized by Gods. I just commentated them. For the G1 League, this was the first Chinese Dota tournament ever broadcast live to the West. At first, we were going to be streaming on, God, I can't even pronounce the name. I'm just going to type it in the chat. But it's Fengyun Zibo. God, I don't know how to say. Initially, they wanted us to stream on that platform. So it looked like it was going to be a train wreck. I loaded up XSplit at the time. I think I had some scenes with like 12 videos or more. So this stuff came from all kinds of sources. We commissioned some pieces ourselves, some hype trailers, and fight daily recaps of like road to the finals videos for teams. We had translated interviews. There were a lot of people from the community who stepped up, provided them to us for free, just out of their own time, and were able to use those. So we went all out, right? Because this was our only event. It was the only thing we were doing. It was basically let's just see how it goes. Let's see if we pour everything we have into this thing, what's the best show we could do at the time. And I think for an XSplit web show, it was remote broadcast. We didn't have a studio, we didn't have cameras. It was the best Dota coverage that had ever been done from that type of a setup, which, to be fair, was a very limited one. Now, the truth is, if we had tried to do that for every event, I wouldn't be able to commentate Dota full time. It's just it's not sustainable from a financial point of view. It's trust me, no one is more frustrated than me when, if not every game can be that intense, but it's just there's too many games. So either those games are just not covered or they're cast by someone else. And it's just the I guess it's just kind of what comes with experience more than anything. Now, I like looking at DAC for example. I think we did a pretty good show considering that we weren't live at the event. We really tried our best to get as much extra content for the Chinese stream, as many video pieces as we could there to have as little downtime as possible. I wasn't a perfect show by any means, but not you can't unfortunately right now the state of it's like with players, right? These
Right.
players are playing 50 events. The amount of effort that EG puts into an online tournament is totally different from a LAN finals, and they're. I'm just picking EG out at random. On your average team, maybe they're not the best example, but pick any team, they're not going to bring their 110% every tournament when they're involved in live events. It's just not possible, and that's it can lead to burnout at times. It can lead to players being disappointed, but if you want that level of production and that quality of a show, you have to go for quality over quantity. And the problem is finding ways to monetize it to make it financially viable. Riot is a great example of what it can be with LCS. Now, I don't like League too much. I don't really care about it. I've tried to play it a few times when I've been drinking, but when they invest everything they have into it, you can make some pretty awesome productions. Now, we don't have the resources for that. ESL doesn't. MLG doesn't. If they did, they'd be doing it. It's just not feasible for that level of coverage on a consistent basis requires huge resources slash basically Valve support in a big way in order to make it work. Because look at how people are making money through Dota 2 right now.
Right.
It's sponsors, it's ad revenue as a broadcaster, and the big one that grows the prize pool and isn't really profit but does help cover some costs is hats.
Right.
But how do you have those year round? They're a one-time thing. So unless you're going to get like a chest of immortals, every couple of weeks, it's just not feasible to do that level of a show every time. So I think at times we have let our quality slip, and I think it's a fair criticism of us. We've grown very quickly, and we're trying to find that balance between doing as much content as we can and doing it well. Now, I will say, no matter how much effort we put in, you're never going to get as good of a show as what we'll be able to put on for a DAC or Star Ladder Land Finals or what Valve could do for TI. You're just not going to get that for an online tournament. Can it be better? Sure. Have we sometimes been lacking in our quality and product? Sure. Teams have bad games. They play like shit for a while. They disband. They change a player. They have a meeting. Someone yells at them. They step it up. Everybody has their ups and downs. It's happened to every broadcast studio. We're not perfect. I would never claim that we are. I think I was a little naive at the time, but I think it's generally that is what everyone should be striving for, is to elevate the standard for how tournaments are covered. Maybe you're not doing it every broadcast. I would say over the long term, though, that is still that's our core goal. And you might not see it every day, but I mean, looking at like the Summit 2 All-Star match, I'm really proud of what we did there. I think that was a completely unique experience that's never been delivered by any tournament before. And I'm very proud of what we were able to do there. So I think at times we've had those huge hits, and obviously that wasn't totally us. As any broadcaster is at the mercy of the players in the team. So if they play shitty Dota, or if it's a shitty patch, or if there's a lot of server issues, well, then it might end up being a shitty tournament experience. But basically at the end of the day, I think overall, I think that is the way that you should be approaching it. You just have to be realistic that you might not be able to do it with every single broadcast.
Right. Coddle Guy can't control the fact that he's sitting there for 6 hours waiting for a game to start. It is what it is. So this actually will take us to whenever I have somebody on, especially the head of a studio, I like to give you a chance to sort of address criticisms that are out there or floating about. And I think you sort of brought that up a second ago. I think one of the biggest criticisms that I've heard recently and over the last couple of months is the idea that, people actually said this on Reddit. It was Just My Humble Opinion posted and said, do you see that it's very possible that the BTS monopoly on casting major tournaments is actively hurting the scene? Some actual competition would stiffen things up a lot, and he's not talking about tier 2 tournaments. And I think that to go along with that, one of the other big criticisms is there was a period there where a lot of people felt that you were sort of just putting anyone who was around on to cast games and that quality was suffering. Do you agree with that? Do you think that it was a byproduct of oversaturation, or do you think that people are just talking out of their asses?
Probably a little bit of all of the above,
Okay.
if I can choose that answer. I mean, I'm not gonna lie. There have been times where we've had a ton of content, and that period after TI4 was particularly ridiculous. Not just with us. I mean, everybody was just throwing as many tournaments as they could at the wall. They saw the prize pool of TI4. A lot of companies have made big investments in Dota since then. A lot of tournaments were rushed, were executed poorly, were just slapped together. Maybe I think in a lot of cases it's not even because it's a cash grab. It's just because they're too eager to get in the market and to start trying to create content, and they rush things. So I think in general, what I would say is that we not every game can have an A-list caster, right? To the extent that you believe in casting tiers, which I kind of hate the fact that that's even a topic of discussion, and I think it's a very narrow way to look at the game. But Toby can't cast every game. Joy Dota had a period where they went through something similar, where they had a lot of content, and Toby was. I mean, I wasn't actually there, but from my conversations with him and just what he said publicly, he was sleeping at the office, dude. Like, he was casting like 18 hours in 24 hours. I admire his perseverance, but that's not a sustainable lifestyle for anyone. It's not possible to always have the best teams and the best casters on every game. And I would actually say that I think that's a good thing. And I'm proud of the fact that we've given a lot of people a chance. Yeah. I'm just going to run through a list of some commentators who are somewhat more established. A lot of these people worked at TI4, started as kind of grassroots community people, but going through the list, you've got Zyori, Coddle Guy, Mott, Basekip, Lysander, Cyclops. All of these casters started with us. Right. We gave them games at first. We paid them for their time, but nobody knew who they were before they started casting with us. And I think if we didn't offer them those opportunities, some of them would have made their way, but some of them might have never gotten a shot. So do I think that putting these commentators on, and I'm just naming names, right? But to the extent that there's like a worse caster out there, like, is putting them on one of these games mailing it in? I don't think so. If the game is not two tier 1 teams, then I love casting those games. Like, I got my start casting Southeast Asian Dota, and if I had unlimited time and resources, I would be totally happy to cast a lot of Pinoy Dota. No 322, please. To cast NA Dota. I mean, I absolutely love it. Dakota's another good example. Coddle Guy loves casting his NA Dota, and those teams don't bring in the most viewers, but some of the most fun casts I've ever had have not been, your Navi versus Alliances or Secret versus EG. Yeah, they've had some great games, but I mean, there comes a point where it's not just about passion. You have to pay the bills. You have to be able to make sure that you bring enough money so that you don't go broke, so that you can pay your employees, so that you can have resources to run another event like the Summit. So yeah.
You brought up casters that you guys helped get your start in. I think that's great. And I probably am not supposed to ask this question, but I know that everybody who watches Dota right now wants to know, when are you guys finally going to just make the jump and move Coddle Guy out to LA? Is it coming? Can we look forward to this? Are you allowed to talk about it?
I can say that you're going to have more information about that very soon, probably in the next day or two, as it turns out. But
wow.
I don't want to spoil anything yet, so you'll just have to wait and see.
Okay. I just, I think that a lot of fans appreciate the grassroots start that BTS had, and really love seeing. It's been a while, it feels like, since we saw someone come from the bottom, in the sense of Coddle Guy hasn't been casting that long, right? I mean, when you talk about your rise to fame, I think that you had been casting for 6 months prior to TI. Toby started casting by complete accident because he was there for a different tournament initially and got asked to do Dota. And that was sort of the first generation of casters. And now you have a whole second generation, third or fourth generation at this point, like Coddle Guy, who fell in love with it because it was established, and proves that there's still a way to break into the scene. Do you think that is a reality? And let's be honest, I'm sure that you get asked all the time, how do I break into this tournament? What, is it possible? I mean, there's got to be thousands of amateur casters out there. Is it a feasible dream?
It's a lot harder now than it used to be. I got in at the right time. If I started casting today, it's possible I could make my way and become a top caster, but it would be extremely difficult. The difference between casting and playing, like, I think it's obviously hard to break in as a pro player, and some of it is networking, but if you really are that good, at some point you'll have a chance to prove it, and assuming you work hard, and you'll get noticed. With casting, the only way you could prove you're good is if someone watches, right? If nobody sees you cast, it doesn't matter if you're Morgan Freeman, which I was joking the other night. I would love to watch Morgan Freeman cast.
That'd be amazing.
That'd be pretty amazing, but it's just a fundamentally different business. casters are ultimately entertainers. Obviously, they can hope to educate, they can hope to share their passion for the game, they can try to just help people understand the team's histories more, but in the end, their audience determines their success. So if people hate your commentary, they're going to let you know about it. If they think you put on a shitty broadcast product, they're going to let you know about it. I think a lot of the casters who are big now would have it would be really tough for me to grind to the top from if I started today. I actually think some of the up and coming casters, like Cuddle Guy's a great example. I mean, the guy has theater training. He's done small shows in New York for theater. He's done acting. He has really good camera presence compared to pretty much any other Dota caster. And he's also really good looking. So you look at someone like that, if he started casting when I did, he'd probably be the biggest Dota caster, or right up there with the biggest of them. So a lot of it just comes down to when you get in, if you get in at the right time, and we got lucky.
So along those lines, and I got a lot of questions about this, like when I put up the Reddit, hey, ask LD anything you want, a lot of them said, give advice to fledgling casters. So I want to take a spin off of that because this gets asked a lot. Let me ask you this. When you were doing an interview with Team Dignitas, Nakara asked you, how do you become a caster? And you said, don't ask people if they would be interested in your casting. Don't try to gauge if you have the quote-unquote right voice or correct level of knowledge. Just go ahead and do it. Do you still stand by that as the best way to get started in casting?
Yeah, absolutely. I think Day9 did a video about this, and I think Day9 does a lot of really great content. If you're depressed or if you're looking for inspiration, if you're thinking about getting into esports, I don't actually remember which daily it was, but basically he had been getting those questions for a long time, and his response was just shut up and do something. Don't ask me, Toffees, if I think that you could do a real, is there a place for a podcast? Just do the damn podcast. Try to promote it. Try to get some feedback. See if it goes well. If it doesn't go well, either iterate or try something else. But the other thing is, I've had people contact me. We got a lot of up and coming casters who want to work with us. It's we're one of the larger casting studios, so it's just natural. People are going to say, "Oh, hey, I'd love to work with BTS, or I'd love to work with Join Dota," and they'll say, "Hey, I'd really want to be a caster. Do you guys have any jobs?" I'm like, "Well, have you casted before? Can you share some of your videos with me? Do you have a portfolio?" They're like, "Oh, I've never cast before." Can you imagine playing to an art position and not having a portfolio? Hey, Valve, I really want to design heroes for you. Yeah, I want to be an in-house artist. Oh, that's great. Where's your portfolio? Oh, I've never actually drawn anything before, but I'm going to start if you tell me that I have a shot. That's not how it works.
So let me ask you this, and this may be a question that hopefully will help all of the fledgling casters who are tuning in. In acting, and I've had the pleasure of working in the theater and film industry as well, we create something called a reel. And a reel, if you're not familiar with it, is a short snippet of anywhere from 15 to 45-second examples of shows or performances that we've done. If I contacted you and sent you a highlight reel of my actual casting, is that something that you would prefer, or do you prefer a full-blown hour and a half, here's a demo tape?
Something quick.
Okay.
I'm not gonna lie. For me personally, I feel like I never have enough hours in the day, so if someone goes to the effort of putting together like a 3 to 5 minute highlight reel and it's actually decent, first of all, you've shown a lot of effort. Secondly, it's easy for me to digest and evaluate. And for any other organization that you might look to work with, I think that's way more valuable. I don't want to don't link me to your YouTube channel. I mean, I will watch a game if someone asks. I have the time because I do want to help up and coming casters as much as possible. But if you're trying to sell yourself to someone as a caster and you think you're good enough to get noticed, then just show them your best work. I don't put on my resume, all the times that I fucked up in previous jobs or all the things I didn't really do a great job of. You tailor the resume to promote you in the best possible light. And I mean, it's just kind of the nature of the way people get into casting. It's very much something people do out of passion because they hear a caster that they really enjoy. They want to be able to deliver a similar product. They just love talking about Dota, or they know a lot about Dota and they want to educate people if they're an amateur player, up and coming semi-pro type player. And because of that, it's different from pro sports where people come in with more like formal radio training, broadcast training, and so they have all those polished skills. Sometimes maybe they lack the passion in some cases. Drill book. But yeah, so that's basically where I start.
So as we push into the back of the interview, because we've been going for about an hour now, so I don't want to keep you too long, and I want to have people to actually have time to listen to the interview. Moving into just some Reddit stuff that came out that I think is worth addressing. first one, this was interesting. So Prove Attitude, who's a fairly popular YouTube creator. If you guys haven't seen her series, you should definitely check it out about the history of Dota as it transitions over to Dota 2. That said, she starts out her post with, other than the obvious Toby LD mutual hate, which I want to get to in a second. But she asks, how does LD feel about competition and the attitude between other casters? When you were more of a amateur caster back in Dota 1 and in the beginning of Dota 2, did you feel there was a lot of competition between casters? So I guess that's the question. Do you feel like there was as much competition then as there is now? And do you think that there is a lot of competition attitude in the marketplace?
There is a lot of competition. I think in my personal experience with most casters that I've worked with, it's pretty healthy. It's like, oh, this he does this really well. I want to be able to do that as well as him. I've taken a lot of notes from Toby's commentary, from AC's commentary. He has an incredibly polished radio broadcast. Toby just has amazing hype and ability to build emotion throughout a broadcast. I love just the casual banter that Suns Fan and Cinderin have. Something very similar, I think, to what Tastosis had. Although it's a little bit more casual and poop joke oriented with them at times. But I've tried to take little bits and pieces from everyone, and I think that is being competitive in some sense, but it's like a healthy type of competition. I think it's what you have with most teams. Most teams are like, they kicked our asses, we want to play better than them and kick their asses. We don't want to win. Nobody wants to win the Super Bowl where the other team just played like shit, right? Everyone wants to win that epic Super Bowl where both teams go blow for blow up until the final moments, and then in the end, you just have one more play. You score the last touchdown, you kick the last field goal, whatever the case may be, and you win. So yeah, I think I'm a naturally very competitive person. It's why I played a lot of sports growing up. I wouldn't say I cried after every loss, but I was a pretty intense competitor. I'd get in little fights all the time in soccer and football. I think I've mellowed out a bit in some ways. My goal right now isn't purely about my own casting though. I want to be as good of a caster as I can, but I also just want to. I guess I've kind of evolved my goals over the years where it's not just about me doing the best job as a commentator. I want to do the best job as not just a broadcast studio, but even as an event organizer and just a large organization in Dota 2 that can hopefully make positive change moving forward. And the summit has been criticized for many of the issues I had at the summit too, and I think a lot of it's very justified, but ultimately, I still look at the event and feel like we've contributed something positive to the Dota community. That was an opportunity that I never thought we'd be able to even go after a year and a half, 2 years ago. When we made the call to run the Summit 1, it was a very hotly debated situation. As far as Toby goes in particular, since, people love to invent drama. Toby and I have had our differences over the years. We've had times where we've been frustrated. Ultimately, we are competitors. We work for rival studios, and obviously there are certain contracts that both studios want to land. That's just business. ABC and NBC both want the Super Bowl, right? It's all about, who's going to be able to, in that case, it's about who can bid the most. And, ultimately that's what's going to determine it. But so overall, I have a lot of respect for Toby. I don't personally hold any grudge towards him. We've had our differences over the years. I've made mistakes, said things I shouldn't have. He's done the same. But end of the day, I feel like Toby's someone who's done more for Dota than 99.9% of people. I have nothing but respect for his commentary. I think he's the best typecaster in the game. And, I would happily sit down and have a beer with him.
So true or false, did you... Reddit comes up with some great stuff. But apparently there's a claim that you had a 20 meter restraining order during TI.
Wait, meaning like I had to stay away from Toby or he had to stay away from me?
Or that you guys couldn't come within 20 meters of each other, apparently.
No, that's not true.
Darn it.
Well, if it was, then we both violated it multiple times, so.
Multiple times? Do you have a Ferrari in your garage while we're dispelling myths?
I do not have a Ferrari in my garage, nor my driveway, nor in my possession, nor do I have a Swiss bank account with $500,000. No, I do not make mid six figures. I'm not raking in $500,000 a year. If you must know, I think last year I probably earned about $30,000 before taxes.
Oh wow!
Now that's because we've chosen to reinvest as much as possible in the company and the people we work with. So I could have given myself a bigger salary, I suppose, but I live a simple life, man. I don't go out much. I don't spend a lot of money. I'm kind of a homebody. I'm a little bit boring at times, I suppose, but we're not living as large as people like to think. But I'm glad that they all believe it.
It seems pretty universal that the interviews I've done.
their version of me sounds really cool. Like
Right?
I've got like a 500,000. I'm packing it in. I'm clubbing in LA, and doing all kinds of crazy drugs. I don't even know what the hip new thing is. I'm doing the limitless drug.
Nice. That's what keeps you up. But I will say, every cast that we've interviewed, who we would regard as established casters, seems to have a pretty Spartan system of existence. I mean, I think that you're probably the third or fourth in a row who hasn't even had a picture on the wall of his bedroom, outside of like Zyori, who just likes to have things look really nice.
Yeah, you saw the good part of his room.
Okay, nice.
I love Andrew to death, but he is incredibly messy.
Okay, so he turned the camera the right way. I like that. What else do we ask? Oh, here's a good one. Politan's brought this up, and actually I heard it from some other creators as well. Do you plan on expanding content for BTS? Are we looking at commentaries, talk shows, written stories on the website in the future, or are you just sticking to the stream market?
To be honest, if we could, we'd be doing all of that. We did in the studio for a while. We really enjoyed doing it. To be honest, the main reason that we stopped doing it after TI was that we just got too busy. Gods was quite sick. He had initially a sore throat. It turned out to be like he'd get better on antibiotics, then he'd get sick again. This happened 4 or 5 times. Eventually, he had to get his tonsils removed. Now he's better. But we were expecting to have him back in the studio. We didn't. Then Merlini ended up doing the Zephyr thing, which we didn't know was going to happen until fairly last minute. So suddenly we're down 2 commentators. That's a part of why we had brought in Coddle Guy initially, was we weren't even able to commentate all the content we had already signed contracts and agreed to cover. So just covering the content was hard enough. We did start doing BTS After Hours, which I really enjoyed doing. It's a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it, we basically sit around, played video games, drinking, and it's not Dota. It's like
Right.
Gang Beasts or Smash Brothers or even just classic RPGs. I know Coddle Guy loves streaming Earthbound on his own personal stream. We want to do a lot more, and I will say it can be a grind casting too much. I think it's more enjoyable when you get to do it just that right amount. And I mean, I always bring my A game, but I know my A game is better if I don't have to cast 50 hours a week. But I mean, I've never mailed it in a broadcast, even when I feel like dying or I'm really tired or I just want to go pass out. I always do my best and always bring as much energy as I can. But it's just a more balanced life, not to be constantly casting all the time. So yeah, that's the direction we want to go. The hope is that we can do less content, but do it on a higher quality as far as what we do from the studio. I think we're still moving forward, going to continue where we think it's appropriate to broadcast content that's handled by remote casters, because we've given a lot of people their start there. Many of them have moved on to be successful, established, up-and-coming casters, worked at TI4. And at the same time, I think it's a way to give these people exposure. So I think that's something we'll continue to do. But in terms of like our main studio team, the goal is to start moving in the direction of doing more of a show for everything that we cover as much as we can, not just grinding out casts. That definitely is the goal and the dream. I will say right now that we're a very small team. We are a startup. We're at a point where we want to make a lot of expansions. And I'll be honest that finding good people is actually pretty tough. So that's been one of the limiting factors, not just talent, but people who can help out behind the scenes, whether it's on the business side of things, selling to sponsors, whether it's with production, audio, video technicians. Finding good people is pretty tough. So that's been one of the limiting factors for us. And the other thing is, even if good people want to work with you, you got to interview them. Someone's got to sit down, go through their resumes, interview them, vet them, bring them out, make sure they're a good culture fit, make sure that they're, that they have a good understanding of, and ability to just take on projects. So I think we want to be doing more, and we should be, and we will be moving forward. Besides just grinding out casts and doing a lot of commentary. We still love commentary. It's still going to be our bread and butter, but we've already started to branch out. Running the summit was something that we never could have imagined ourselves doing a year ago. In fact, we were very close to not organizing the event. The main reason we did is we didn't know how much content we were going to have, and we felt like we really wanted to do something cool. And we'd always been talking about it in the summit, so we said, let's just take a risk. Let's just go for it. But well, I think we've expanded what we do a lot. In some other areas, but as far as like day-to-day content from the studio, I think that is an area where we haven't shown a ton of growth. In fact, it's at times looked like we've taken steps backward, and we want to take steps forward there moving forward. Nice.
Is there any other games in the future for BTS? Or are you guys going to, or have you not looked outside of the world of Dota 2?
I really love Counter-Strike, and
Okay.
I think our goal is to expand into other games. Dota's my first love as a commentator. Counter Strike's my first love as a player. I know some of the other guys here are really passionate about Hearthstone. I'm even vaguely interested in that Blizzard game Overwatch. It looked really sweet. I know it's not fully out yet, but um, I'm a gamer, not purely a Dota player, although it is my main game of choice and has been for a while. So I think in the future BTS may expand. Now, does that mean that you're suddenly going to see gods casting Hearthstone? Probably not. I think to the extent that we expanded into other games, it would most likely involve bringing in people from those titles who are established, who can focus on them full time. There are certain elements of commentary that are game independent. Presentation,
Right.
vocabulary, pacing, emotion, all this stuff. But you have to have a certain amount of game knowledge to know when to get excited, to know what's worth talking about, even if it's just to ask the analyst to go into it in more detail. So I don't envision us like having all of our Dota talent constantly cast the other games, but would we like to expand into other games and bring beyond the summit elsewhere? Yeah, absolutely.
So before we wrap up, I've got one thing I wanted to bring up from a little while ago. We did a show, it had to have been 2 weeks now, where we had Greg and a couple of other folks on the show talking about tournament oversight and things like that. And I went back to the chat logs to that show and found a portion in the chat log where you were talking. It sounded like you were saying that.
What is this, dude?
Well, dude, I do my research. That Greg was advocating for oversight, and that would potentially cause Dota Pit to be completely abolished. Do you think that Valve oversight or an overseeing body would hurt tournaments like Dota Pit that have no LAN presence?
As I recall, the way that Greg was describing how the oversight would work would absolutely ruin events like Dota Pit. Now, I'm sure there are models where these events can still exist and be successful, but Greg being Gerg tends to get a little too blunt and a little too loud, and I'm just like, dude, what are you talking about? You would be out of a job in your world. um, it's just not going to happen from Valve. I think Valve will continue. Valve wants to. I feel like they more want to kind of change the way the river flows a little bit, rather than get on the boat and start, swinging around the wheel and trying to like directly and forcibly shift the seed. At least the Dota team. I realize the CSGO team is a slightly different approach because Valve is a collection of individuals, not a company in a lot of ways. So do I think that there's a lot of benefits to Valve taking a more active role in the scene? Absolutely. Do I think that Valve is ever going to go Riot or Blizzard? Probably not. I think DAC was an experiment for them, running more of like a mini TI. I think given the success of the tournament, it had some issues, but overall, I think it was a really enjoyable experience for people. I think we're going to see more of that in the future. I don't think Valve is going to actively like block people from running events or tell teams to only play these tournaments. They're not going to tell teams you're invited to TI halfway through the year. I think Valve is going to take a much more behind the scenes approach, but are they going to gently or even firmly, but behind the scenes, try to influence the course of change? Yeah, I think Valve is. They have their ears to the ground. I mean, they obviously read Reddit, right? Every time there's a bug on Reddit, it's fixed the next day. They're listening. They just you have to. I guess if you want to trust Valve, you have to do it kind of on blind faith, or maybe on faith from their past actions. But you're never going to get an esports manager for Valve. I don't feel like there's never going to be someone who's just like, yeah, guys, here's exactly what we think about all these issues in the scene and constantly getting into the community. They've been very clear on the Steam Dev Day talks elsewhere that the worst thing you can do with communicating is to over communicate. And we've learned that the hard way. Once you start opening your mouth, you can end up making promises, you build up expectations, which you may or may not be able to fulfill. So I don't think Valve's communication style will ever make people particularly happy, but fortunately they do a great job in other ways. Not perfect, but great. So
It's funny. Describing it like that makes Valve sound more like a religion than a company in a lot of ways.
I mean, I think to some extent it is, but people are crazy about their Valve games. Have you seen the Cult of Gay Ben or Half-Life 3? It kind of has some religious vibes to it, I gotta say.
That is absolutely true. So last thing, and we talked about it a little bit last week, there was this big crazy storm started over the idea of some players going to Seattle to start a players association. Aoi posted out, and I believe it was Aoi that said it. This isn't, guys, this is just us talking to Valve for some other stuff. Way to blow it out of proportion. Why do you think that was such a big deal? I mean, tournament organizers in the lower tiers were putting together letters to Valve talking about how this might not be a good idea. That was all the buzz. Do you think it was just hype, or do you think that there is...
Wait, tournament organizers were putting together letters to
I think
Valve?
that there were some smaller tournament organizers who were in that sort of tier 3, tier 2 grouping that were worried about a players association essentially killing off some of the smaller tournaments because of the fact that they would no longer agree to play in that many events.
Well, I mean, to the extent that those people are complaining, I to me, I hate. I'm so tired of hearing the word oversaturation. There is no oversaturation. And to the extent that there is, it's not because there's too many tournaments. It's because certain teams have tried to play too many games and too many events. The best possible situation is for there to be a billion tournaments. I mean, not actually a billion, but a lot of events where teams have choice. It's competition. People are complaining that BTS is a monopoly. Well, competition is healthy. Competition is good with organizers, especially. A lot of these players seem to want it I guess they have kind of this idealized vision where DreamHack and ESL just do a joint event and then it's double the prize pool. And that would be great, but I mean that's just not how business works for the most part.
Right.
So these are separate companies with completely different goals, philosophies, and just scope in terms of the types of content they're looking to do. So in general, I think it's really good that the players are talking, and I think it's excellent that they're talking together. I'm honestly baffled they haven't before, but I think with a lot of Dota players, they're just so focused on the game and winning, and part of that comes down to the structure of the Dota 2 scene. It's all about TI, and ultimately TI is all about the game, right? For players, they don't if you win TI, all you have to do is be really good at Dota and play exceptionally well, and that's pretty much it. Valve more or less takes care of everything else. You don't have to worry about too much of the the distractions and other stuff. You can go there as a team that doesn't have sponsors, and if you win TI, you're set. So I think because of that, a lot of players, more so than other games, have tunnel visioned on just gameplay, and now they're slowly waking up and realizing, oh shit, we're playing every tournament. Why are we signed up for every event? Oh, because we're worried that Valve won't invite us to TI. Let's examine that belief. Is it logical that Valve is not going to invite a team that won DAC? I mean, EG cannot play another event before TI. They're getting invited to TI. I don't care what you say. So I don't think they would do very well if they didn't play any tournaments. I don't think that will happen. But I think the players are just slowly realizing that they have some power. At the same time, I also think that there will probably be some pushback. Players are very demanding of tournaments. I would, in my experience, sometimes very reasonably so, sometimes very unreasonable. As happens with tournaments' demands of players. Sometimes tournaments treat them fairly. Sometimes the same event will be really fair in certain ways, really unfair in others, or do things that make the players unhappy. As the players organize and start becoming more demanding and exacting of tournaments, tournaments are going to start raising their expectations for the players. And I think it's a good thing and a healthy thing. And if EG not playing Canada Cup means the Canada Cup can't exist, then that means the Canada Cup either needs to change their model or it's an open market. They just weren't fit enough. They didn't survive the competition. So I think some tournaments will fall apart. Some tournaments will crumble. Will have to either change the way that they work or just stop running their events. But I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's great. And I think in the end things will sort out. I think we've already seen them start to a lot. Then there will be a very nice mix of tournaments that, because they have the top teams, are considered a premier event. If you have Secret, AG, Cloud9, Vici Gaming, Navi, Alliance, Newbie, Rave, whatever your list of top teams are, if they're playing your event, you're a top team until you really fuck it up, or a top event until you really fuck it up. So I think in general, it's not going to be flawless. It's not going to be perfect, but it's very healthy for the market to be open. Even though it can be frustrating to us personally at times, just how open it is, it does lead to a lot of chaos. There's a lot of benefits to a more structured model, but it's never going to happen with the way that Valve operates and the level of involvement they want to have. So given that it's never going to be LCS or WCS, how can we make the best of it now? I think that's the way people need to start approaching it. And I think the players are wising up. I think tournaments are also wising up. A lot of tournaments have spent a lot of money on some really big events that ultimately were not profitable. So as much as players think that tournaments may have limitless pockets and are rolling in the dough, the truth is that putting on events to the satisfaction, that at the best possible standard is extremely expensive. And a lot of these larger organizers like ESL or MLG have investors. They have a certain amount of budget where they can run a bad event and they're not going to go under. But at the same time, they're businesses. If Dota is consistently unprofitable, they're going to go elsewhere. And I mean, the same, unfortunately, is true for anyone, no matter how passionate they are about the game. So I think there will be basically a tug of war between tournaments and players over the coming year, and things will sort themselves out in the end.
That sort of brings me to my last question. And it is, you may know that or may not know, I have a son who's just about 6 months old at this point. And I wonder, and some folks were asking this on Reddit, do you think that he'll be playing Dota 2 or Dota 3? Or do you think that the industry is already starting to move away from Dota as one of the premier esports?
Oh, God, I have no idea.
But I need to know how to train him, LD.
Well, I think if you're good at games in general, that it's pretty transferable, not completely. So just get him playing something, man. Have him play Smash. Smash is great. Nintendo makes a lot of money on that game, so they're going to continue to release new ones. But Dota is very difficult to get into. We're already starting to see CS:GO really explode, and I mean, CS is an awesome game, but I have to say, as someone who watches and plays a lot of them, CS is a lot easier for a new player to follow. And a lot of the games that Hearthstone is another great example. From what I understand, Blizzard doesn't even really want this game to be an esports title. They want it to be a casual title, but it's just so damn easy to watch and to get into that you can play it on your freaking iPad. So because of that, it's built up the audience. So now there's kind of an esports community around it. But Dota, as much as I would love to say that at some point everyone's going to be playing Dota, I think it's just a little bit too hard to get into. And somehow either the game or the way it's presented visually would have to change to make it more accessible. I was watching with my friend's girlfriend the other night, and she's like, oh, it's 6-3, so that means this team is winning. No, that's not at all the case, right? But I mean, that's, most people who watch Dota, their frame of reference is other sports or other games. And there's just no, in CS, you have the round count. So, teams leading 12-8. And yeah, there's some nuances where, CT side's much stronger on most maps, or at least a bit stronger. But you can at least, at a quick glance, get a rough feel for the game. It's really hard to get into. I think it's easy to forget for a lot of us because we've all just been playing the game so damn long. We fiend this shit. We play pubs. We watch streams. But Dota, to me, a lot would have to change for it to reach that total mainstream level. I think it will continue to do very well and grow, but will it be the biggest esports title ever? I don't know about that.
Fair enough. So as we wrap up, do you have any last thoughts or shout outs that you want to give before we call it a night?
Oh, man. Well, I would start by saying shout out to everyone at Beyond the Summit. They all work amazingly hard. We have a really great team here. So in particular, I'm talking about Zyori, K-Pop Tosis, Coddle Guy, Gods, Merlini, although he is, as I guess Demon has leaked several times, taking a bit of a step back to focus on playing, but he's been a big part of our growth. Huge shout out to everyone who worked on us throughout DAC. We brought in Wepis, who did an awesome job observing. We had the Dota Cinema guys here. Shout out to my buddy Winter from Malaysia. I don't think he's watching, but he is just a bright and cheery presence to everyone in general. I really miss the guy. Shout out to Roland. I think beyond that, just much love to everyone in the community who's tuned into your stream. I really enjoyed the show, Toffees. Thank you for having me on. You asked great questions.
Thank you.
And I hope you'll do more in the future.
Absolutely. We're pot committed, boys and girls, and if you like the show, we just got partnered, so this is actually a pretty big deal, LD. The fact that my channel got partnered with 450 followers, and the fact that I only make content for this podcast. So we're all, when I say we all, I mean me. I just speak in the general we sense. Is very excited about that step. So please hit that follow button. Follow me on Twitter at Toffees_Dota2. Making content, that's what I like to do. So thanks for being here, guys. Remember, this show was brought to you by the folks over at Namecheap.com. So if you're looking to register a domain, that is the place to do it. And that said, I don't think there's much else for us to talk about. So thank you to ULD. Thank you to the guys who are watching. And did you have something you want to throw out there?
Subscribe or I will find you and I will kill you. Support this man. He does great work.
I appreciate that. We don't have an emoticon yet, but we will one day. I don't know what it'll be. But if you sub now, you can be part of that discussion. So thank you. Thank you for being here, LD. Thank you for the support. And thank you to everybody who's listening. Guys, have a wonderful night. This will be up on the podcast and the YouTubes and pretty much anywhere it needs to be in the next couple of hours. I've enjoyed spending it with you. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, Toffees out.